She parked sideways across my driveway like she owned the place, blocked my garage completely, and then had the nerve to tell me, "I'll only be a minute." 2 hours later, she was screaming into 911 because I had parked my truck behind her, and suddenly she couldn't leave. That's when her perfect little power trip turned into the most satisfying reality check I've ever seen. I've dealt with entitled people before, bad neighbors, rude strangers, delivery drivers who think hazard lights are some kind of legal immunity shield. I've seen it all. But nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever matched the pure confidence of the woman who decided my driveway was her personal parking lot and then acted shocked when I made sure she couldn't leave. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of normal, boring day where absolutely nothing should have gone wrong. I work from home most days, and around 3 p.m., I had planned to head out to pick up a replacement part for my garage opener. Ironically, that garage opener was the reason I noticed the problem in the first place. I had gone downstairs, hit the wall button, heard the garage door start to lift, and then stop. Not because it was broken, because there was a silver Lexus parked diagonally across the entire mouth of my driveway, close enough to the garage apron that my door literally couldn't clear without scraping the hood. For a full second, I just stared. My first thought was that maybe someone had broken down. My second thought was, no, broken down cars don't usually have their wheels turned sharply toward the curb, like someone intentionally tried to wedge themselves into the most inconvenient angle possible. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. I stepped outside and looked around. No driver, no note, no flashing hazards, just a clean luxury SUV parked halfway across the sidewalk, halfway across my driveway, effectively pinning both my car in the garage and my truck on the side pad. It was so aggressively stupid it almost felt personal. I checked the house across the street because they were having some kind of birthday setup in the backyard. Balloons, folding chairs, one of those rented inflatable things kids lose their minds over. Sure enough, there were extra cars lining the curb. But unlike every other normal human being who had managed to park on the actual street, this woman had apparently decided that my driveway was a better option. So I walked over and asked the first guy I saw if he knew whose Lexus was blocking my garage. He looked toward the driveway, winced, and said, "Oh, that's probably Melissa's." I said, "Well, Melissa needs to move it." He gave me the kind of uncomfortable smile people use when they already know the answer is going to be annoying. "She's inside helping with decorations," he said. "I'm sure she'll just be a second." That phrase should be illegal. Just a second is what entitled people say right before wasting 45 minutes of your life. I told him clearly, no, I need it moved now. He nodded, disappeared into the house, and I walked back over expecting this to be over in maybe 2 minutes. Instead, about 5 minutes later, out comes Melissa. Mid-40s, oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head like a tiara, expensive activewear, giant iced coffee in one hand, phone in the other, expression already loaded with the kind of irritation people reserve for cashiers and flight attendants. She walked toward me like I was the inconvenience. "Is there a problem?" she asked. I actually laughed because the audacity was so immediate. I pointed at her car and said, "Yeah, it's blocking my garage." She looked over her shoulder, took a slow sip of her drink, and said, "I'm only here for the party. I'll move it later." I said, "No, you'll move it now." She gave me this look, this smug, dismissive half smile, and said, "Wow, you're really making a big deal out of this." That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with a normal person. A normal person apologizes. A normal person says, "Oh, wow, sorry, I didn't realize." This woman, she wanted a power struggle. She wanted me to accept that her convenience outranked my property. I told her calmly, "It's my driveway. You're blocking my garage. Move your car." She folded her arms and said, "I said I'll move it later. I'm carrying stuff in and out, and I don't want to lose my spot." Your spot. On my driveway. Incredible. I asked her if she heard herself. She rolled her eyes and said, "Honestly, it's not like you're leaving this second." That line hit me in a way I can't fully explain. Maybe it was the assumption. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the way some people genuinely believe they can decide what level of inconvenience you're allowed to feel on your own property. Whatever it was, something in me clicked from "let's solve this" to "okay, we're doing this now." I told her one last time. "Move the car." She smiled, took another sip of coffee, and said, "No." Just like that. No apology, no explanation, just a flat, smug no. Then she turned around and walked back toward the party like she'd just won something. I stood there for a second, replaying the interaction in my head, making sure I hadn't somehow hallucinated the whole thing. Then I looked at my truck, parked legally on the side pad that runs along my fence line. Long enough, heavy enough, and angled just right that if I backed it out and positioned it behind her Lexus at the bottom of the driveway entrance, she wouldn't be going anywhere. Not onto the street, not around the curb, not without me moving first. And before anyone gets dramatic, no, I didn't touch her car. I didn't block the road. I didn't trap her in some dangerous way. I simply used my own vehicle, on my own property, to make sure the person who had decided I didn't get to use my driveway suddenly had to experience the exact same feeling. So that's what I did. Calmly, deliberately. I backed my truck into place, left enough room to stay legal, locked it, and went back inside. Then I made myself a coffee and sat near the front window like a man who had accidentally bought front row tickets to the stupidest live show in town. It took 42 minutes. 42 glorious minutes before Melissa finally came power walking back down the driveway, carrying a foil tray and talking loudly on speakerphone. She stopped dead the second she saw my truck. Then she looked at her Lexus, then back at my truck, then at my house. I could practically see the moment her brain realized what had happened. She stormed up to my door and started pounding on it like she was collecting a debt. I opened it just enough to keep things civilized and said, "Can I help you?" She was furious. "Move your truck, right now." I said, "I'll move it later." The silence after that was delicious. She stared at me like I had slapped her with a tax form. "Excuse me?" she snapped. I shrugged. "I'm only here at my house. I'll move it later." She actually sputtered. "You can't block me in?" I said. "Interesting opinion." Then she launched into a speech about how she had to leave, how this was illegal, how I was harassing her, how I was keeping her prisoner. I reminded her very calmly that she had blocked my garage first, refused to move, and specifically told me I was making a big deal out of it. Her response? "That's different." Of course it was. It's always different when the inconvenience flips directions. She demanded I move my truck again. I told her I'd get to it when I was ready. Then she did exactly what I hoped she would do. She pulled out her phone and called 911. Right there, in my driveway. Over a parking tantrum she started. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just stood there and listened to her tell the dispatcher, in the most offended voice imaginable, that a hostile man had trapped her vehicle and was refusing to let her leave. She conveniently left out the part where her car was blocking my garage first. Funny how that works. The dispatcher must have asked whether this was on private property because Melissa immediately turned and pointed at me and said, "Yes, but he can't just do this." I almost corrected her, but honestly, why interrupt someone while they're building the exact rope they're about to hang themselves with? She ended the call by saying, "Please hurry," like she was reporting a hostage situation instead of the consequences of being told no. While we waited, the neighbors started noticing. Party guests drifted toward the front yard. Curtains twitched. One of the dads from across the street came over and asked quietly if everything was okay. Melissa answered for me. "He's blocked my car in because he's being petty," I said. She parked in my driveway and refused to move. The dad blinked once, looked at her, and then just slowly backed away like a man who wanted absolutely no part of what was clearly about to become neighborhood folklore. The cops arrived about 12 minutes later. 2 officers, one younger, one older. The older one had that expression officers get when they already know they've been called to something deeply stupid and are mentally preparing not to laugh in public. Melissa practically ran to them. She launched into a dramatic version of events where she was apparently the innocent victim of an aggressive homeowner who had intentionally trapped her for no reason. She talked fast, waved her hands a lot, and pointed at my truck like it was evidence in a murder case. The older officer listened politely, then turned to me and asked, "Sir, is this your driveway?" I said, "Yes." "Did her vehicle block your garage?" "Yes." "Did you ask her to move?" "Twice." "Did she refuse?" "Yes." "Do you have that on camera?" I smiled and said, "Actually, yes." That's when Melissa's face changed, just a little. Enough. Because like most arrogant people, she was extremely confident in her version of reality right up until she realized there might be evidence. I pulled up the footage from my doorbell and side camera. There she was, pulling into my driveway. There she was, stepping out casually. There she was, telling me she'd move later. There she was, flat out saying no when I told her to move. And there, beautifully preserved forever in 1080p, was the exact moment she told me I was making a big deal out of this. The younger officer actually had to press his lips together to stop himself from smiling. The older officer watched the clip twice, handed my phone back, and then turned to Melissa with the patience of a kindergarten teacher addressing a child who had eaten glue on purpose. "Ma'am," he said, "you parked on someone else's private driveway and refused to move when asked. That's the beginning and end of this." She immediately tried to pivot, "But he blocked me in." The officer nodded. "On his own property, after you blocked his access first." She said, "That can't be legal." He said, "Neither is parking on private property without permission and obstructing a resident's garage." Then came the line that made the entire ordeal worth it. He looked directly at her and said, "You are not the victim in this situation. If there had been a trophy for public humiliation, that would have been the engraving." Melissa tried one last desperate move by saying she felt unsafe. Unsafe. From what? Accountability? Gravity? The officer wasn't having it. He told her she had two options: apologize and wait until I chose to move my truck, or have her vehicle cited and potentially towed for unlawful obstruction on private property. The silence that followed was unbelievable. You could practically hear every person on the sidewalk mentally replaying her attitude from earlier. She looked around like maybe someone would save her. Nobody did. Because when people act like tyrants in public, even their own friends start pretending they barely know them. And honestly, I almost let her sit there for another hour just on principle. But the older officer pulled me aside and said quietly, "You've made your point." He was right. The point had not just been made, it had been gift-wrapped, signed by law enforcement, and delivered directly to her ego. So I agreed to move my truck on one condition. She had to back her car out immediately and leave without another word. The officer relayed it. She looked like she wanted to argue, but for once in her life, reality had her in a headlock. I moved the truck. She got in her Lexus. And because karma has a wicked sense of timing, she was so flustered and angry that she nearly backed into one of the decorative stone planters by the sidewalk while trying to leave. The younger officer had to physically motion her to stop and straighten out. The whole thing was so embarrassing I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Before she drove off, the older officer handed her some kind of warning slip and said, loudly enough for half the block to hear, "Do not park on this property again." She didn't respond. She just drove away with that stiff, furious posture people get when they know they've lost, but still haven't emotionally accepted it. The aftermath was even better. By the next morning, apparently the entire neighborhood had heard some version of the story. Two separate neighbors stopped by to ask what happened, which is suburban code for "please retell the best part slowly." One of them, an older woman who lives 3 houses down, told me Melissa had a reputation for parking wherever she felt like during parties and school events. Translation: she had been getting away with this kind of nonsense for years because nobody wanted the headache. Well, congratulations. She finally found someone who had both the time and the dashcam storage to care. A week later, I came home to find a little bouquet and an apology card tucked near my porch. No name on it, but the handwriting was definitely female and definitely too controlled to be sincere. It read, "Sorry for the misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. Sure, because accidentally parking across someone's garage, refusing to move, calling 911, and getting corrected by police is exactly the kind of thing that just happens. I kept the card, not because I forgave her, but because I believe in preserving artifacts from important historical moments. And to this day, every time there's an event across the street, people park a little farther down now. The curb in front of my house stays weirdly, respectfully empty. My driveway, untouched. My garage, accessible. My peace, fully restored. And the best part is knowing that somewhere out there, Melissa still has to live with the fact that she called 911 expecting me to get in trouble, and instead got told, in front of cops and neighbors, that she was the problem all along. That's the thing about entitled people. They love power when it only flows one way. But the second you mirror their behavior back at them, they panic. Because deep down, they know exactly how wrong they are. They just never expect anyone to stop them. And when someone finally does, that's when the real show begins. So tell me, if someone parked in your driveway, blocked your garage, and refused to move, would you have blocked them in too? Drop your opinion in the comments and subscribe for more entitled people and HOA-style revenge stories.